The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews.
Hello and good evening and welcome back to another episode of Hayes Reviews. This is Nick. I'm the creator of Hayes Reviews, and tonight we're going to be live streaming a live reading of a book. I know in this day and age here in 2026, in February, people are starting to forget what books are. People can't remember. What is he talking about? A book? What is that? What is that old-fashioned artifact of the past? But here on this channel, this is what we do. We're trying to resurrect a love of reading. We're trying to preserve knowledge and information that has been written down and handed to us by some of the best researchers, some of the truth seekers of the past. And we're trying to really create a resource that can expedite people's learning. I want people who are curious, who care about reality, who want to understand truth, who want to dig a little deeper than the mainstream narratives, which, to be honest, are pretty shallow. That's why it's a mainstream, because it's shallow. It's a stream. And show you that there's a lot more going on. There's a lot of history which is left out. There is a lot of machinations, movers and shakers who are not focused on the BBC 6 o'clock news. And even in the alt media, there's a lot of gaps in what they're presenting. And here we're trying to fill in those gaps. And the best way to fill in those gaps is to read books. Now, I should mention, when I'm talking about books going out of fashion and being forgotten and people not wanting to read anymore, I did actually hear about a movement that's going on right now on TikTok, and it's called Book Talk. And apparently there's some young men out there who are encouraging their audiences to read books along with them, and this phenomenon is called Book Talk. Perhaps you can access it by using a hashtag and getting into TikTok. I've never used TikTok. I've never looked at it. I have a feeling that it will become very addictive and a bit of a time sink. And I don't need more addictions in my life. I'm trying to get rid of the ones that I already have. And so that is why I'm, that is why I'm avoiding TikTok at all costs. But yeah, Book Talk, it's a thing. It's out there. So maybe it's coming back. So if you know of any young people who are getting scooped up in this craze, this crazy practice of flicking through little gathered together pieces of paper that have markings on them, and then if you know people who are getting into that, then send them my way. Send them to Hayes Reviews and say, hey, this is a good resource for people who like books. But it's good to have you here. We're going to be continuing tonight with our reading of Foundations, Their Power and Influence by Rene. This right here is the inside title page of the book. It's a 1958 book, as you can see at the bottom there, published by the Devin Adair Company. And so far, it's been a fantastic read. We've polished off chapters 1 and 2. And tonight, we're going to be embarking into chapter 3. Before we get into the reading, I'll do a little summary and recap some of the points that we've hit so far in the book, because it's worth doing that as people trickle in and they figure out that we're streaming and they join. It takes a while for people to cotton on, even though we do this at the same time every week pretty much. People might be confused because I did have a couple of weeks off. I'm still feeling a little bit under the weather. You might be able to hear it in my voice. And also tonight, I don't have my super sexy blue light blocking shades. I left them. at my mum's house. And so I'm battling through with the glare and some achy eyeballs, and that are not soothed and not comforted by those filtered lenses that I usually have on, because I think it's important that we keep going and we get another live stream onto the record. Now, I will say right now that this could be the last live stream for, well, it will be the last live stream for the rest of the month, because I'm going away as I do at this time of year. We didn't go away at this time last year. We did the year before. If you were with us on the channel 2 years ago, you'll remember that I streamed Lusitania by Colin Simpson from Vietnam. And it was a very ropey connection, but we battled through and we had a good time reading that book. This year, I'm not going to be taking my streaming stuff with me, because instead of streaming while I'm on holiday, I'm going to be taking my 7-month-old son with us. And that is going to take up all my time and spare energy and attention. And I don't think it's going to be reasonable for me to hope or expect to squeeze in any live streams while I'm away. So I'm not going to be here for the rest of the month live, but I have scheduled clips to be published every day from now to the end of March. So you can grab them and share them. And I've taken these clips from 5 different books that we've read on the channel. And so there's a good variety in there. We've got The Rockefeller Foundation by Raymond Fosdick, which complements Foundations very nicely. We've got The Sustainable Prince by Joan Vion. We've got The Fearful Master by G. Edward Griffin. We've got The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy by Juan Ratiu. And I think that's 4, isn't it? There's a 5th one as well. You'll have to dig in there and find out what it is. I'll leave that one as a surprise. But please enjoy those, and you can share them around. They go live at 12:30 every day. It's amazing, really, that I can, with a relatively low amount of effort, edit these clips and schedule them to be published. There's a link actually in the description underneath of it's an affiliate link for that program that I use, and it's good because you can just put in a URL from a very long video. My live streams are 3 hours typically. So I put the URL in there, and then it churns out a load of clips, and then I have to go through and edit each clip, which is a bit arduous, and it takes a bit of time, and it's not always perfect in the selections that it makes, but it's faster than me loading the 3-hour video into DaVinci Resolve and going through it and clipping it myself. It's much faster than that. So yeah, it's a good tool. It's called Opus Clips. And so those clips will be going onto YouTube primarily, but also Instagram and Twitter for the rest of the month. And, while I'm not live streaming, we can take this opportunity to catch up on other books that we haven't listened to yet, and to grab those clips and to share them around. So keep an eye out for those. Celine Lyon's here. We got Frank as well. Heidi was here as well. Good to see you all. Yes, I am going to be escaping the never-ending wind and rain. But it's not going to be all sunshine and hot temperatures and sitting on the beach in my shorts and sunglasses where I'm going. It's going to be somewhere in the region of probably 15 degrees Celsius for the whole time I'm there. So, it's kind of like autumn here. It's not that much better if you think in terms of weather, unfortunately. But there's a lot of other reasons that are going to make it into a wonderful trip. And I'm very much looking forward to it. So we're setting off on Monday. And so I'm going to be quiet for the rest of the month on my social media channels and email and all that kind of stuff, because I just need a break. I'm just going to take a bit of time away from it. So, good to have you here. We're going to do a little recap, then we'll get into tonight's reading. Heidi says, one can read all the wrong books. Been there, done that. You say that, but reading all those wrong books brought you to where you are today. And if you didn't have those wrong books under your belt, how do you recognize the right books? See, if all you were ever given was right books, you might get tired of those and be craving and wanting to be curious about the wrong books, So right, wrong, how do you judge that? I like to think that no book is wasted. I think one thing that's worth mentioning is you can give up on a book. If you get into it, you get a certain way through it, you think this is not doing anything for me at all, chuck it, leave it unfinished, move on to the next one. I'm a bit of a completionist. I like to get to the end, right? I like to do the whole thing before I move on to the next one. And so, but I think I've probably wasted a lot of time reading some books that I didn't need to read, that I should have just ditched when the alarm bells were ringing. So that, I would say, start the books, maybe skip to the end and just read the conclusion instead of reading the whole book. But is there a wrong book? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. There's a lot of books out there. And these days, you know, I think the marketplace is flooded with books. And you've got all and the thing about books is they take a long time to consume. You're looking at, you know, it could be 10, 15, 20 hours per book, depending on how fast you read. And so, yeah, you got to be cautious. You do have to be a little selective, let's say, because your time is limited and your attention is precious and valuable. And so you need to put it somewhere that is going to get you what you need and what you're looking for. So with that said, deep thanks to everybody who chooses to spend their precious life force and time and attention on here with me on Hayes Reviews. It's lovely if you're tuning in live, and if you're watching on the replay as well, it's also good to have you here. I'll mention that I wrapped a conversation last night with Melissa of Alan Watts, CTTM, and CuttingThroughTheMatrix.com. We talked about Philip K. Dick's book, A Scanner Darkly, which I think we did about a 2.5 hours, 3 hour conversation about that. And that's going to go live in about a week and a half. And as our next book, if you're reading along with mine and Melissa's sort of journey through fiction, we're going to be reading Christopher Priest's book, Inverted World. And one of the reviewers said it's one of the trickiest and most astonishing twist endings in modern sci-fi. That's the reason I like a twist. So I bought the book on the strength of that. So that's what we're reading next, Christopher Priest. This was published in the 70s. So there you are. If you're following along, if you like to read the books that Melissa and I read ahead of our conversations discussing them, then you can grab yourself a copy of that. We got Turbs. Good evening. And thank you, Celine Lyon, for saying have a great trip. I do intend to. So let's get into our little recap of last week's reading. We finished off chapter 1, and then we read the whole of chapter 2. It's quite a short chapter, actually. Chapter 1 was the study of foundations, and we finished it off with a section called Foundation Responsibility. And I've re-listened to that video, and there's a lot in it. There's a lot in this book so far. It's really good. I was saying to Melissa last night how much I'm enjoying it, how valuable I think it is, how much I like it more than Between Two Ages because it's just more readable. It gets to the point, and it's very fair and even-handed. It's quite a sober and objective account, I think. It's not sort of biased. It's not revealing the conspiracy of the foundations to take over the world. You know, it's not that kind of text. It's quite a fair, factual account. So we finished off Foundation Responsibility, chapter 1, and what we learned about there was the size of the foundations and the impact that they have, and we got some numbers and some data around that. But Wormser told us that foundations constitute a small financial fraction of American philanthropy, despite popular perceptions. So, I mean, some foundations have enormous pots of money to throw around and play with, and others don't. And Rene Wormser makes the distinction that not all foundations are the same, just like not all human beings are the same, right? There is no single foundation. There's no typical foundation, he said. They're all kind of different. They're all structured slightly differently and have different interests and sources of funding and structures of governance. And so there's really no one size fits all. It's kind of a loose term when you say foundation. What does it really mean? And that's kind of a theme that goes through a lot of what he said so far, is that ambiguity in language is what gives these organizations quite a lot of their power and influence. So he said they actually constitute a small financial fraction. He gave us some numbers, but those numbers are not so useful after we've lived through another 70 years of inflation and money printing. So there's no point repeating those so much. But what he said was that foundations, despite being limited in size, hold a unique societal position. He said they lack traditional accountability. There's no constituency membership or academic oversight, and many operate under a venture capital theory, funding experimental or controversial ideas. So he talked about how these tax-exempt organizations are used as a vehicle for wealth preservation, and the people who'd made massive fortunes under the so-called free market system, such as the Fords, Carnegies, and Rockefellers, they then started to fund and dole out money and put it aside in these foundations so that it could be used to, surprisingly, fund thinkers and groups and research that was subversive to the system that allowed them to get rich in the first place. That's one of the surprising features of foundations. But that thing comes up again and again in this kind of research where you're aware of, for example, Anthony Sutton's work, finding out that Wall Street funds the Bolsheviks and Hitler, right? You're finding out that the communists have the same backers as the capitalists. You're finding out that really these dialectical systems are controlled at the very top by the same people. And it's the people with the money and the people who dole out the cash. So Wormser telling us that they operate under this venture capital theory shouldn't be that surprising when there's massive amounts of money involved. As I said in the previous video multiple times, people expect a return on their investments. They don't just give out money because they're kind and generous. Certainly not when you get to those volumes of money. So they're looking for a return on their money, and this is why it's better to think of the foundations as venture capitalists. Okay, but he did mention as well this phrase, clearing houses for ideas. He said some foundations see themselves as clearing houses for ideas, selecting and promoting ideas with long-term consequences. So there's a way of looking at them as sort of long-term social engineers. And I mentioned that this is very similar to the Fabian method of gradualistic change, little by little infiltrating, permeating, and changing from within the institutions and organizations and groups which already existed. Instead of making a new group and taking over, you can just infiltrate the ones and change the direction they're going from within. And the foundations play in this battlefield of ideas. They're very interested in, certainly the ones that Rene Worms is talking about in this book. Again, not all foundations are doing the same thing. Some of them, he said, are legitimate and authentic and do genuinely serve the public good, right? The ones that he's focusing on in this book, they're doing something else. And he said that the funding and the time was limited for the Reese committee. So they couldn't investigate all of them. They had to be selective, and they had to sort of narrow it down and be very targeted in their investigations. But what they turned up was that the foundations that they investigated were very interested in ideas, very interested in what they call seductive ideas. He said small foundations can shape society by promoting seductive ideas. And he used the example of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace having relatively small assets value and a relatively small annual spending, but having an overwhelmingly large influence on foreign policy and law schools and the State Department and the UN. So the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace is something that I think would deserve its own deep dive and close study itself. So the idea is that it's not just about the money involved and the amount of money involved, but it's also about the ideas and how these ideas are supported, and then spread around. Okay, so that's a key thing to bear in mind. He said that the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace evolved from idea exchange to active advocacy and promoted specific internationalist doctrines favored by trustees and staff. So this was something that he talked about in the last section, which is that the organizations, these foundations they looked at, had a very, very clear bias. And it tended to be a left-leaning bias in the direction of what would be called progress and change for change's sake. So anything that challenged the status quo, anything that challenged traditions, conservatism, long-standing institutions, things like community, family, marriage, traditional gender roles, monogamy, Christianity, a lot of things that were in place for a very long time and provided stability, provided structure. These would be challenged in the name of progress, and the people studying this stuff would get funded. And an example that we learned about was Kinsey and his $400,000 of funding into sex problems, the research of sex problems or something, which, well, I don't know what the problems were exactly. I mean, if people are having children, then what's the problem? You know, if the population is dwindling, as it is now in some places for certain populations, certain groups, then maybe now's the time to look into the sex problems, right? There seems to be some problems. People aren't figuring out how to have more children, but, you know, there's a lot of factors involved in that. I'm just kind of trying to make a joke here, even though it's a tragic thing. And really it's down to people being conditioned and being the social engineers turning people away from wanting to do that, wanting to have children, wanting to start families. People being trapped in extended adolescence for their whole lives, you know. So you've got adults playing with Lego and spending a lot of time on computer games, and you've also got grown men and women worshipping their pets like they were children, pushing them around in prams and spending insane amounts of money on little outfits for them and operations and medication and all this kind of stuff. It's kind of weird, very strange times that we're living in. But hang on a sec, I'm going to sneeze, I think. There it is. But sex problems, if you want to destabilize, you know, remember this was written in this is published in 1958. So it was ahead of the swinging 60s. And the lead into the swinging 60s was all this free love, right? Hey, no possession. There's no, you don't own each other. You don't belong to each other in a monogamous long-term marriage or relationship, right? Everyone belongs to everyone. And this is what Aldous Huxley wrote in his book, Brave New World. So you get researchers like Kinsey coming along. I should use researcher in very, you know, inverted commas in loose terms there. And he builds a soundproof laboratory, and then he does lots of experiments on children. And I mentioned a couple of books that explain this by Judith Reisman. And it turns out that Rockefeller's foundation is funding him to the tune of $400,000, okay? And the influence of his research has a knock-on effect that we're still feeling in today's world. And that's some of the history and relevant background to this problem that we now have, where governments tell us, well, you know, there's too many old people, there's not enough young people, so we're going to have to import a lot of people from another country who have nothing in common with you whatsoever, totally different religion and culture and language and way of dressing and way of speaking and beliefs and roles and all this kind of stuff. And they're very precious because the minorities are very precious. The minorities have to be protected and supported and loved and coddled and encouraged and defended at all costs, no matter what they do. And, you know, the people who liked the older way of doing things, the conservatives and the traditionalists, you really get ignored. You get called nasty names, and that has to happen because you're not having enough children, right? And it's a whole convoluted mess, and none of it makes any sense. But it's a long running agenda that goes back to the 60s, and the foundations who are funding the sex researchers such as Kinsey, who helped kick off the swinging 60s and the free love revolution that took place then. So it's this advocacy for ideas, seductive ideas, and a clearing houses for ideas. It's a lot of money going in to change the way people think and what they believe and how they perceive themselves and the culture around them and their societies and their communities. So how was this allowed to happen? Why wasn't this stopped or prevented from happening by law? Well, the reason is that the section of the law, Worms have told us, section 501c3 does prohibit foundations activities, but it does it in a way that's so vague as to be useless, and it's open to interpretation. So the law did prohibit political campaigning and substantial propaganda, but it didn't define the word propaganda. So it's a vague, weak piece of legislation. If you don't define the words you're using, then it's open to interpretation on a case-by-case basis. And he said this is what would happen any time that a concern would be raised. It would be treated on a case-by-case basis. There would be no consistency. Sometimes the tax-exempt status would be removed from the foundation, and other times it wouldn't. And there was no rhyme nor reason as to which would or would not receive this punishment. But that was the only punishment that could be meted out, was a removal of a tax-exempt status. Not that you get shut down, not that you get your funding totally cut, not that you get totally your reputation destroyed in all the media or anything. No, you just get a declassification, which could be won back later on. And he gave us examples of that as well. And another one of the vague aspects of this was education. Worms have told us that foundations exploit ambiguity by labeling advocacy as education. And he used examples that describe themselves as militantly educational organizations that were socialist in nature and were looking to be revolutionary, but they were allowed to receive foundation funding because it's just education. That's all it is. He also used an example of the World Constitution Committee of 1948, which was advocating world government powers, but apparently this was not political, right? Because the political campaigning is prohibited, remember? But apparently advocating for world government powers and creating a world constitution is not political. It's just educational. So it's allowed to be funded by the foundations. And then he said the labor and socialist organizations exploit the same loophole. So despite explicit ideology, such as socialism, such as advocating for world government and internationalism, the courts would still uphold the tax-exempt status. So there was an inconsistency in the enforcement of the rules. And this just shows you that it's some foundations are more equal than others, I guess you might say. So Wormser talked to us as well about this venture capital logic and how it encouraged risk-taking in ideology and not just innovation. So funding ideas was more preferable because that would have more of an impact in the real world in the long term, rather than just funding a service, like, oh, here's a soup kitchen for homeless people, or here's a library for children in poor areas. Rather than tangible, actual services that would benefit the public, they were just funding ideas and concepts and changing perceptions and changing worldviews, because this is how you execute a longer term plan. in the Fabian socialist gradualist way, right? You got to get in the hearts and minds, as I said on the last show. And a result of all this vague application of the law in the court systems meant that basically any ideology could qualify for this tax exempt education. And Rene Wormser made the argument that if socialism qualifies, then so must fascism or segregation. And he was trying to use those as an example of how absurd it is and inconsistently that these rules are applied. So the overall logic of this section was weak law plus semantic manipulation plus judicial reluctance leads to unchecked ideological power and influence. And, that's true to the title of the book, because this is Foundations, Their Power and Influence, isn't it? So the reason that Wormser says this is a problem is because there's no public accountability. And they're operating above and outside the democratic norms that people expect and are told are in place. So that was sort of the rest of chapter 1. And then in chapter 2, let's see, let me find my notes. Oh yeah, it's here. And then in the next chapter, which let me remember what it was called. The Power of the Individual Foundation. This is a really small but heavy-hitting chapter. In this one, he was talking about how the foundation managers denied responsibility for the anti-capitalist or quasi-socialist direction of the grants. And they were saying that the grants were merely backing up and supporting ideology that already existed in the academy, that already existed in the educational institutions. So even though the liberal and anti-conservative biases were there in universities, the foundation managers were saying, well, they're already there. It wasn't us that put them there. And I would argue that it was probably the Fabian socialists that put them there. That's covered very well in Fabian Freeway, which is under the playlist tab. If you want to catch up on that book at some point, maybe this month, while we're not doing any more live streams, would be a good chance. So, and the other thing, the other thing was Rene Wormser used the word penetration of foundation boards and staff by ideologically aligned professionals. He used that word twice in that last reading. And I don't think that was accidental at all. I think that was on purpose to tell people that it was really the Fabian socialists who put that left-leaning, anti-conservative, liberal way of thinking into the academic sphere. And then the foundations come along and they start funding these academicians who are already ideologically aligned, right? But this was the main problem that came out of that section, is that there was nothing done to balance it. There was no foundation funding or grants made available for any right-leading, conservative, traditionalist type thinkers or efforts or movements, right? The whole thing was very much geared towards progress. So foundations became vehicles for academic ideologies rather than neutral benefactors. Then he talked a bit about experts, which I thought that section was really good, because he talked about how an expert is only an expert when they are nominated to be an expert. And then from that point on, everyone believes that they're an expert. See? So this is what makes an expert, is that the media will say this person's an expert, or the news, or the 6 o'clock news, they'll turn to this person and they'll say, okay, tonight to comment on this, we have such and such a person, and they'll have their resident expert. And then now you think that person's an expert, but are they really? Are they actually? And what really makes an expert, right? So he did talk about that, and he said that these experts, quote unquote, are often rewarded for conformity to trends and not originality, They gain authority by selection. So by being chosen to be experts and put on the news and wheeled out and interviewed and put in the newspapers and the magazines, that's how they get authority. It's through the amplification via the media machine, not because of merit or knowledge or skill or wisdom in the area or topics that they're talking about. He said that experts tend to support the current intellectual fads. Why? Because that's what gets funded, and the experts need the funding. They've got their eye on the money. So if you're a scientist, he talked about how you got to get your funding. You need to keep these young men from the foundations happy. You got to listen to them. You got to hear what they're saying. You got to pick up clues in the cocktail party small talk about what will get funded and what won't get funded, and then shape your request for funding based on that. Okay, so they're pandering to these. What do they call them? There was a word that he used. Philanthropoids. That was it. Philanthropoids. Let me find it. And he was saying these philanthropoids are, there you go, the middleman between the philanthropist and the philanthropy. So the person receiving the money and the person giving out the money, they have these middlemen, and they go around and they assess people and they drop hints and they drop clues, and they're young and they're not working in these fields and they're not experts in these fields. They're just sitting on a big bag of cash, and they've got the power to decide who to give it to. And so everybody fawns over them and schmoozes with them and tries to impress them and tries to work out what it is that's going to attract money in their direction. So all this is at play. So it's not a neutral effort to fund what is what is going to do the greatest amount of good for the public, although that's what they tell you it's about. Right? There's a lot more ego involved. There's a lot more motivation. There's a lot more planning. It's not neutral. It's got a purpose behind it, and this manifests in this left-leaning bias towards progress and research that tends to destabilize things and emphasize change for the sake of change. So Wormser was telling us how the dominant academic fashion of the time that he was carrying out this study was socialist and communist intellectual pressure. So that aligns with what we read in Fabian Freeway, and also the trauma of the Great Depression. And that was in living memory for many people at this time. And the fashion, he says, emphasized faith in government manipulation to create a better society. So the government can step in and make some changes, and things will be improved. And he said that tax-exempt foundations have embraced change for change's sake as a creed. And even if they're not conspiring together, he said the cumulative effect of the uniform foundation support favors instability. So they were funding people who would challenge norms and established institutions and ways of doing things, transforming society, getting at the youth, herding them into a certain way of thinking to get them prepared for the next stages of the system that were going to be rolled out. He said foundations rarely support movements aimed at social stability or preservation. And then he used a really interesting phrase, which I noted here, which is war chests in the battle of ideas. So the power of foundations lies in them being war chests in the battle of ideas. And he talked about the field of ideas, and I said it should be called the battlefield of ideas. And then he used this phrase later on. These foundations are like incubating ideas that can be weaponized and rolled out to the public in order to move them along and prepare them for all the planned changes that are coming up. He said foundations fail the public trust by destroying balance in intellectual life. Yeah, that's the theme that keeps coming up again and again, is the foundations are supposed to be there for the public good, and yet all they do is cost the public loads of money because their tax exemption means the public have to foot the bill. And then they just fund all these progressive, liberal, left-leaning types of movements which are destabilizing. He said, when foundations fund only change-oriented movements, stability lacks representation and democratic equilibrium collapses. And this impacts the public because the public are subsidizing all of this. So in the end, for that last chapter, he said that foundations have a religious devotion to change. And he framed this as, this is a massive imbalance. He didn't frame it as a kind of, this is a conspiracy, they're going to ruin society and they want to do XYZ. He didn't focus on their intent. He focused on this being like, this is obviously massively biased and left-leaning towards progressive ways of thinking, towards liberalism, progressivism, internationalism, socialism. And there's nothing and there's nobody involved here who is on the other side of that. So there's no balance. And this is very risky because, as he said in the first part of the book, the first reading that we did in this series, he said that we could end up with socialism even though we don't intend it and we're not looking for it. So that's the recap of the last reading. It was a good one. It was a very good section. I'm sure we're in for another excellent section tonight. I'll have a quick review of the old comments and then we'll get into the reading. We've got David James Flood in the chat and Dr. Crispy Johnson. Dr. Crispy Johnson. There used to be a Dr. Crispy Rothschild. Have you changed your name? Good to see you. Good to have you here. Tammy's here as well. She says, the first time I didn't get a notification. Don't know about that. Don't know why that's happening. But YouTube cannot be trusted. The numbers are all fixed. Obviously, this channel has millions of followers and is creating waves in the wider world. But yeah, YouTube does cook the numbers. I find it hard to believe any of the numbers that are on here. So you got to remember that it's Friday night at 6:30 p.m. UK time. I think you're in the UK, Tammy, if I'm not mistaken. Dr. Crispy Johnson says, please remember to donate all your monies to the Crispy Johnson Foundation. Yes, just tell us how to donate. They don't. But the thing is, to be a donation, to be a donator to a foundation, you got to be minted. You have to be sitting on gigantic piles of Scrooge McDuck cash. Like a swimming pool full of cash that you can dive off the diving board, and come up and swim through your piles of money. That's how they do it in the cartoons. You shouldn't be soliciting donations from poor people watching YouTube on a Friday night. Shame on you, Dr. Crispy. I apologize for my spluttering and sniffing and all that kind of stuff as well. It's I'm not properly looking after myself at the moment, so that's why it's lingering and taking forever for me to clear this. So we're going to get into the concentration of power. Please, if at any point you would like to support the show, you can do so at allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. It's on the bottom of the screen right there. You can sign up for my email course. It's kind of a course, continuityofcontrol.com. And that's a 9-email series delivered straight to your inbox, featuring some of the most ridiculous quotes by some of these despicable elite parasites over the last 100 years. And I think it's pretty good. I like it. I'm proud of it. And all those quotes are backed up with pictures from the books in my collection. I took those pictures myself. They're real quotes. I'm not making stuff up. Or you can send me an email, nick@hayesreviews.com. I like to hear from people. I like recommendations and feedback and suggestions and tip-offs to other books. And I'm also in the market for authors to interview. I've started interviewing authors now. And I've got a good long list already. But if anybody out there kind of has any suggestions or ideas, maybe somebody you're already in contact with or somebody whose book you think I would be interested in and who you would like to hear me talk to, then let me know. Oh, Tammy, you're in Eastern Standard Time. Apologies. My bad. That's a good time zone to be in as well. All right, then. Let's get into tonight's reading. Chapter 3. Where's Nick's pencil? It's gone. I can't read a book without my pencil. Oh, it's there. Got it. Chapter 3. The concentration of power. Let's do it. Interlocks. This is the first section. Although the Cox Committee recognized that the responsibility of a foundation trustee was, quote, onerous to the point that it would seriously interfere with the work of the average businessman, it found it understandable that the services of an outstanding man should be sought by more than one foundation. Its only serious criticism of a concentration of trustee power was geographic. It expressed the opinion that a wider geographical distribution would go far towards establishing greater public confidence in foundations and would dispel much of the distrust which shelters under the traditional fear of Wall Street. Thus, the Cox Committee completely missed the point. What mattered was not that foundation trustees were concentrated on the eastern seaboard, but that a pattern of interlocking operations existed at various levels of management. The geographical location of the majority of foundation trustees was of small consequence. That interlocks among foundation boards existed was clear enough. F. Emerson Andrews, in his Philanthropic Foundations, mentions two complex cases as evidence of the national prominence of many foundation trustees. In one case, the foundation had 20 trustees who held a total of 113 positions as trustees or officers of other philanthropic organizations, or an average of 5.6 each. And remember, part of what he talked about in the last section as well was how these trustees they didn't really want to do anything. They wanted really to just show up and give the thumbs up and dole the money out. It's not a job that they took seriously. It wasn't a full-time job. It was more like a sort of side gig that looks good on the CV and the resume that doesn't have a lot of responsibility. You just sort of show up and, yeah, give them the money. That's cool. You know, yeah, give the man with the soundproof laboratory who's got an unhealthy obsession with sexuality and children. Yeah, give him the money. That's fine. You know, so that is shocking. 20 trustees with 113 positions between them, 5.6 each. Ridiculous. It says the range of outside positions ran from 0 to 14. The board of the other foundation, which Mr. Andrews cited, was composed of 14 trustees, holding a total of 85 outside philanthropic positions, or an average of 6 per trustee, the range being from 0 to 13. If, as the Cox Committee held, a foundation trustee's job was onerous to the point of seriously interfering with his business, one wonders how any man could simultaneously fill 13 or 14 philanthropic offices effectively and conscientiously. Well, exactly. They couldn't, could they? Because it's not a real thing. It's one of these fake jobs that the parasites give each other so that they sound like they have authority and they sound impressive and they sound like they're doing something very meaningful and important. Oh, I'm a trustee on a philanthropic organization. Oh, yeah, so 13 of them. Yes, yeah. Oh, wow, that must be tiring and very difficult. Oh, yeah, that's very, very hard. It's just fake. So continuing, overlapping of foundation administrators is an old story. In his foundation, John D. Rockefeller employed some of the same men to whom Andrew Carnegie had entrusted his endowments. Dean Rusk, speaking for the Rockefeller Foundation, explained that consultation among foundations arose, quote, from the desire on the part of each one to use its funds to the best advantage. He defended discussions among foundation officers as a desirable means of exchanging information to avoid duplication of effort and to permit funds to be used wisely. However, the intimate associations which Mr. Rusk lauds can be dangerous. They can operate to force our culture into a uniform pattern. There you go. And I think that's probably what it was more about. It was more about standardization. It wasn't about, oh, well, we'll make sure we don't, fund the pedophiles too much. It was more about standardization and making sure enough money was going to where it needed to be to make the desired changes in society and the culture to smoothen the transitions and the planned upgrades to the systems and the structures that were coming down the pike. So, forcing the culture into a uniform pattern, that's very important. That's otherwise also known as harmonization. In the financial world, this is called harmonization. It's part of the Great Taking, part of the Everything List. This process of harmonization came out of the 2008 financial crisis, and since then they've been very hard at work behind the scenes harmonizing everything so that the next time there's a financial crash, planned and foreseen and known about and way ahead of time, that all the systems will be interoperable and all the goodies, all the assets, all the collateral can be transferred to the secured creditors, who are who are they? That's the question. Who are they? Who are the secured creditors in the Great Taking? I don't know, but it's probably not us. So yes, forcing the culture into uniformity, standardization, and harmonization. These words come up again and again. And actually, it's funny to mention harmony, because we had, I put a picture up in the Telegram channel. I saw a magazine cover, and it showed King formerly known as Prince Charles, and it said he was seeking harmony. And he actually wrote a book called Harmony, published in 2010, which was about his vision for the world. And I would get it and show you it, but it's up on a high shelf over there and I can't be bothered. But yes, these are the kind of words you got to look out for. So I'm not surprised to see it here. So continuing, Rene Worms is warning us that this could be dangerous. They can operate to force our culture into a uniform pattern. It would be far better for society to face the occasional waste which lack of inter-foundation planning might cause than to take the risk of losing a truly competitive intellectual climate. Indeed, there is similarity between Mr. Rusk's plea for cooperation among foundations and the arguments given for industrial cartels and for regulating competition, for that matter, with the rationale for a socialist planned economy. There's a very important section there. Rockefeller is said to be quoted as saying competition is a sin. And I use the metaphor that it sounds like these philanthropaths are kicking the ladder away. They've made their wealth and their fortunes, and now they're transforming the system to make sure nobody else can. And they hold on to the wealth and the power and the assets. So continuing, the men who operate foundations do have power often greater than that of elected or appointed government officials. The law applying to public servants is very strict in defining conflicts of interest. They are held strictly to an exact loyalty. There are no similar limitations applying to trustees or officers of foundations. They may support their pet causes. They may cause donations to be made to institutions or funds on whose directive boards they sit. They may be donors and recipients at the same time. They may favor their friends or relatives and pay salaries and fees without limitation. Hundreds of years ago, the church introduced rules against nepotism. No such rules prevent those in control of foundations from using power to gain more power. Through combinations with others, mutual endorsements and support, and the many subtle forms of collusion available to them under our foundation system. There you go. Critical passage that we just read there, for sure. Showing you there are no checks and balances, and this is why the foundations are favored by these families and these organizations that have a massive amount of money. If there is need for clearinghouses in educational, scientific, and public pursuits, that does not justify a domination of these institutions by foundations and their staffs to continue the widespread practice of simultaneous directorships in grant-giving and grant-receiving institutions is against the public interest. Abstention from voting, where there is a conflict of interest, does not adequately protect the public. The very presence of a trustee or officer with dual allegiance can have an improper effect on the foundation's decisions. It seems fair to require individuals to choose whether they wish to operate on one side of the street or the other as givers or receivers. Moreover, a switching back and forth frequently observed seems highly undesirable. In the interest of continuing a free market for ideas, the managements of granting and receiving institutions should be carefully separated and kept clear of any taint of conflict of interest. See, the thing you got to look at here is this word "should," and the sad fact is that these committees and these commissions, all they can do is make these kinds of recommendations. It should not be this way. It should be like this. It could be like this. It could be run this way instead. You might change this thing here. All they can do is recommend things. They have no teeth. They have no power. They have no ability to hold to account. And that's the sad thing about it. So these investigations go on and nothing changes, unfortunately. That is the world we live in. But at least we can learn the truth about how these things operate. So continuing, the effective interlock which exists in the foundation world finds expression in many ways. Among them, 1. Trustees serving on more than one tax-exempt organization, often both granting and receiving organizations. 2. Joint support and or control by several foundations of fund-receiving institutions, particularly clearinghouse organizations and scientific, educational, and public affairs councils or associations. 3. Issuance of matched grants or promises of grants with the proviso that funds are to be supplied only if and when others support the same project or cause. 4. Service of foundation personnel, simultaneously or in short succession on staffs of foundation-supported institutions. And 5. Service of foundation officials, trustees, or managers on government advisory boards in control of government policy or spending in fields identified with foundation philanthropy. Their independent, uncontrolled financial power often enables foundations to exert a decisive influence on public affairs. They have a power comparable to political patronage. The propagandistic effects of this patronage can often reach far beyond the immediate beneficiaries of foundation support. The emergence of dominating agencies in various fields of learning and teaching was a likely development. Foundations were originally created to support existing institutions and to undertake certain operating functions. Today, and all too frequently, new recipient organizations are created by foundations or with their subsidy, while needy and worthy existing institutions are ignored. So they're creating the foundation. They're creating the organizations themselves and then awarding the funding to those organizations. Like it's insane, really. But that is the way the world really works. The Ford Foundation in its early years created many sub-funds for research and education which duplicated existing similar organizations. In the 1920s, several influential scientific and educational councils were set up jointly by cooperating foundations. De facto, almost all major foundations insist on approving the selection of personnel in the recipient organizations. They wish to know who will spend their grants or benefit from them. An apparent donation is often, in reality, a disguised financing of a foundation department. It is attached to an outside institution or organization, but little is left to it to do except bookkeeping and related administrative functions. Universities, hospitals, institutes, and learned societies sometimes supply nothing but their name labels affixed to what is actually a pet project of foundation managers. In effect, everything from the budget to the choice of ad hoc appointed professors or researchers is controlled and decided by foundation officials. The concentration of power has measurable influence on our cultural life. The Social Science Research Council once published a study of its own granting activities. This clearly showed a preference for 5 of the largest universities in the United States. Similarly, the National Science Foundation, an agency of the US government, found that the same foundation-sponsored institutions had received the major share of hundreds of millions of dollars of government contracts. How about that? Such a concentration of private support by foundations and public support through government agencies is distinctly to the detriment of higher education in our country. Favoritism for institutions and for scholars of a few such institutions tends to cause a migration of talent from the neglected to the pampered universities and gives a few schools of higher learning an elite character, at the same time reducing both the comparative prestige and the potential of others. Frank says, perhaps you might consider interviewing John Waters at some point. Thank you for the suggestion. He is on my list. I haven't got any of his books yet, though. So that's what I need to do. He's got one out called Feckers. That might be a good one to start with. But he's got quite a few books out, hasn't he? So I need to get a hold of some of them and see if I can get in touch with him. But yeah, I would definitely consider talking to John Waters for sure. So we're getting an insight here into how things really work. And what we're kind of seeing is part of the function of foundations is to avoid oversight, to avoid the checks and balances of the democratic process, to not be beholden to the public, and for a small group of people to get funding to their pet projects. So who are these people and what are their pet projects? That's something we've got to find out about. But it's clearly that they're not there for the public good. They're there for the advancement of the plans and purposes of a very small minority. So the next section is intermediaries as joint instrument of several foundations. Americans have never liked monopoly or a concentration of power in private hands free of public control. When they have found it in the business world, they have legislated against it. They are not likely to be pleased to find a quasi-monopoly operating in intellectual areas which are not mere ivory tower, but influence our society very materially. A system of interlocks among major foundations and associated organizations has long existed in social science research and education. No group of men sat down deliberately to plan this thing overall. It just grew into being, but it is nonetheless dangerous as a concentration of power. It came about largely through the use of intermediary organizations to which foundations could donate wholesale funds for retailing grants. The system was so convenient and intriguing that clearinghouses were brought into existence further to amplify this system of delegation. What seemed to justify the use of these intermediaries was the belief that they would bring about greater efficiency. In a way, they did. Each specialized in some field of research or of social action, and often could act with more detailed understanding than could the contributing foundations which scattered their interest over large areas. On the other hand, as Professor David N. Rowe testified before the Rees Committee, efficiency is by no means the most desirable factor in research. Moreover, by using the convenience of intermediaries to delegate power and thus to escape the arduous duty of detailed programming and selection, the trustees of a contributing foundation removed themselves further from the ultimate results of their expenditures and were less and less able to follow and check the application of their funds. In large industrial enterprises and in government, the delegation of authority is an essential management device. The proper use of the same instrument in the area of ideas has distinct and narrow limitations. In industry and government, the delegation is one of operational responsibility within the framework of a given value system, the policy of the organization. That is quite different from the form of delegation all too often employed in foundations. Here, in effect, the delegation is of actual policy decisions. These policy decisions may deeply affect our society. No better example of this could be found than the case of the Institute of Pacific Relations to which I have referred, used by the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and others as a distributing agency. Okay, so the Institute for Pacific Relations is one of these intermediaries. It sounds like they're doling out money on behalf of these foundations, one of them being the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which was singled out as being very small but having a massive influence. So this is going to be very interesting to learn about. So continuing, the Institute. So this is the Institute of Pacific Relations. The Institute became the specialist in the Far East. The tragedy was that it also became a specialist in promoting the communist cause in Asia, succeeding so well in this endeavor because of the vast financial support given to it by the major foundations. Yeah, that's very interesting, isn't it? So you've got the American foundations, Rockefellers, Carnegies. They're pouring money into the Institute of Pacific Relations, who is funding the promotion of communism in Asia. So, you know, when people are arguing about communism and capitalism, and you're saying, yeah, but the same people fund both, you can point them to this book as evidence. I think, in fact, this is one of the key pieces of evidence that explain that to people. And I think we're going to learn a lot more as we work our way through. But continuing for now, the Institute for Pacific Relations, the donating foundations sought to absolve themselves of responsibility for what resulted. But, as Professor Rowe stated in his testimony, the granting foundations cannot escape responsibility for what their agents have done. They granted these agents great power, a power immensely enlarged when foundations, acting in concert, supplied such substantial financing that the intermediary agent became a dominating force in its specialized area. The potential power of the major intermediaries was illustrated by Professor Rowe in his testimony. I had asked him whether the intermediary system did not operate against the competitive factor which is intrinsic in our American way of life. He testified, quote, "There is no question but what an organization like the Social Science Research Council has a tremendous amount of power. This power which it exerts very heavily on educational institutions and their personnel, because when you get down to it, who is it that does research in social science? It is educational institutions, because they have the faculties in the various fields, like political science, economics, anthropology, sociology, geography, and so on. That is where the people are. This, therefore, means that there is a tremendous responsibility here to apportion their awards in a just way, in such a way as takes into account the differences of approach and the differences of opinion in these fields, the theoretical differences from one school to another. The possibility exists that at all times in any of these organizations that the people in charge thereof become convinced that there is one way to do a job in the social science field and that only this way will get their support. If and when that time comes, I don't know whether it is here or ever will come, then you will have a combination in restraint of trade within the limits of public acceptability that may have very deleterious effects upon our intellectual community." So one of the things I think is worth talking about and dwelling on is social science as a discipline, as an area of study, as an area of intellectual inquiry. What is the history of it? It hasn't always existed. It hasn't always been accepted as an area, a valid area of study, okay? And that's important to look at. And I think it's covered pretty well on the History of Propaganda channel by Dwayne. Talks about this. I think he touches on it in the video about the UN, the long road to UN, but I could be mistaken in remembering that. But knowing the social science, what is it? How far does it go back? When was it established? Who was it established by? These are critical things to know about. Because social science, what does it mean? It's kind of management of populations, management of people, management of communities and groups and nations. That's what it sounds like, doesn't it? And of course, it's going to be linked to socialism, surely. So the next section we've got here is what makes up the interlock in the financing of social science activities. And remember as well, social science is one of the three areas that Rene Wormser says can have the most... So he said there's three areas which can have the most harm to America and the American people: international relations, social sciences. I can't remember the third one. What was the third one? Just totally slipped my mind. You'll have to go back and re-listen to part 2 to dig up that third one. It might actually be, hang on. If we have a quick look at the contents, that might remind us. Foreign policy, education, that was it. Yeah. So chapter 4 is all about social science and scientism. Part 5 is radicalism in education. And then part 7 is foundation impact on foreign policy. So yeah, those are the three areas: social science, education, foreign policy, I think. But let's continue with this section. The report of the Reese Committee described the network or cartel in the social sciences as having 5 components. Interesting to use the word cartel there. The first is a group of foundations composed of the various Rockefeller and Carnegie foundations, the Ford Foundation, referred to as a latecomer but already partially integrated, the Commonwealth Fund, the Maurice and Laura Falk Foundation, the Russell Sage Foundation, and others. The second component consists of the intermediaries or clearinghouses, such as the American Council of Learned Societies, the American Council on Education, the National Academy of Sciences, the National Education Association, the National Research Council, the National Science Foundation, the Social Science Research Council, the Progressive Education Association, the John Dewey Society, the Institute of Pacific Relations, the League for Industrial Democracy, the American Labor Education Service. The learned societies in the several social sciences were listed as a third component. The fourth consists of the learned journals in these areas. And the fifth was certain individuals in strategic positions, such as certain professors in the institutions which receive the preference of the combined. The report proceeded. The patterns of interlocking positions of power may take various shapes. The following are the most frequent ones. 1. Trustees or employed executives are successfully or simultaneously trustees and executives of several foundations. 2. Trustees or executives serve successfully or simultaneously as officers of other tax-exempt organizations, receiving grants and or retailing the wholesale grants from their own foundations. 3. Trustees or executives accept appointments to positions of power in control of education and or charity so as to multiply their influence beyond the budgetary powers of their foundation resources. 4. Foundations jointly underwrite major projects, thus arriving at a condition of coordination restraining competition. 5. Foundations jointly create and support centralized, coordinating agencies that operate as instruments of control, by claiming supreme authority in a field of education, science, the arts, etc., without any resemblance of democratic representation of the professionals in the management of these agencies. And finally, 6, rather than distribute money without strings attached, foundations favor projects of their own and supply the recipient institutions not only with the program, but also with the staff and the detailed operations budget, so that the project is actually under control of the foundation while professionally benefiting from the prestige of the recipient institution. That one's a big one. The choice of professors often is won by the foundation and not won by the university. Foundation employees frequently switch from work in the foundation or in the council supported by the foundation to work on sponsored projects and in professional organizations supported by their funds. They become most influential in the professional organizations, are elected to presidencies, and generally rule the research industry. So it's a kind of a revolving door situation. You work for a foundation, and then you end up working for the organizations which receive the money from the foundation, and back and forth and back and forth. So you make quite a nice, tasty little long-term career out of this. As an example of interlocking directorates, the report cited the case of the Rand Corporation. Okay. I don't think they've been mentioned yet. This is a corporation in the nature of a foundation which plays a very important part in government research. It would warrant special attention in connection with any study of the extent to which foundation interlocks have influenced government. Well, that's quite a claim there. Among the trustees and officers of the Rand Corporation were found the following who had material connections with other foundations. So we've got a bunch of names here. Charles Dollard from the Carnegie Corporation, L.A. Dudbridge from the Carnegie Endowment National Science Foundation, H. Rowan Gaither Jr. from the Ford Foundation, Philip E. Mosley from Ford and Rockefeller Foundations, Harvey S. Mudd from the Mudd Foundation, Santa Anita Foundation, and American Heritage Foundation, Frederick R. Stephen from the Rockefeller Foundation, Clyde Williams from Battelle Memorial Institute, and Hans Speer from the Behavioral Science Division at Ford. This example of interlocking is especially interesting because the chairman of this semi-governmental organization, the Rand Corporation, was at the same time president of the Ford Foundation, which granted it $1 million in 1952 alone. So, yes, no conflict of influence there, not at all. The following list of social science consultants serving the Research and Development Board of the Defense Department at one time, 1953, illustrates the frequency with which foundation executives are appointed as, quote, experts, controlling the expenditure of government funds in research. We got Leland Deviney from the Rockefeller Foundation. We got John W. Lardner from Carnegie, Pendleton Herring from Social Science Research Council, William C. Menninger from the Menninger Foundation, J.A. Perkins from Carnegie, and Don K. Price from the Ford Foundation. Closely allied to the practice of interlocking directorates and interlocking advisors and executives is the practice of the major foundations of favoring a limited number of institutions and individuals. Mr. Andrews, in his Philanthropic Foundations, defends this practice by saying that adequate research facilities and the ablest personnel are largely concentrated in these places. If this were so, then the foundations have contributed to an unbalanced condition, and the country would be better off if they reversed themselves and sought to bring up the standards of neglected institutions by being more generous to them in their research allotments. Very good point. Mr. Andrews' explanation does not seem persuasive. The most favored institutions, Harvard, the University of Chicago, Columbia, California, Yale, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and MIT, seem usually to head the list. are not in a class by themselves. I am not sure what Mr. Andrews refers to in mentioning adequate research facilities. Whatever equipment may be needed for social science research could be rented readily enough. But Mr. Andrews' contention about the ablest personnel would be hotly contested by many informed academicians, among them Professor Colgrove, who, in his testimony before the Rees Committee, pleaded for a wider, as well as a greater use of our colleges and universities. He said there is a wealth of brains, a wealth of competence in our small colleges and universities which does not have its share in research grants at the present time. So they're favouring this small handful of elite institutions. I was just looking up the University of Chicago the other day because I found a document that was published. It was like a draft of a world constitution, and it was written by this group calling themselves the Committee on World Constitutions, and one of the authors was Mortimer Adler, who wrote the book How to Read a Book, which is really good. And it rang a bell when I saw that this book outlining a possible world constitution. When I saw that, I saw that it was published by the University of Chicago, and that rang a bell. And I thought, hang on, isn't the University of Chicago set up by the Rockefellers or funded by the Rockefellers or something like that? And if you go to Wikipedia, it does tell you right there that the Rockefellers poured so much money into the University of Chicago and kept it going when it was running at a deficit for many, many years. So it really is a little kind of pet project of the Rockefellers is the University of Chicago. And let me see, I'll show you this book that I found, which looked quite interesting. I didn't buy it. My book budget is burned for this month, sadly. One sec, let me... But if we go here, you can see it's the preliminary draft of a world constitution by the committee to frame a world constitution. I'm very interested in world government and how it goes back, how far it goes back, and how long it's been around as a plan. And this looks like a really interesting document. You can see a list of the authors there with Mortimer J. Adler, who also worked for the Encyclopedia Britannica, and he was part of the group that put together the great books of the Western world, that whole set, which is about 50 or so books, starting with Plato and ending with Freud. But it's got this really interesting pullout here with this whole diagram about what it would look like. And of course they put the people of the world at the top. Isn't that nice? And I'm really glad that they didn't use, you know, a pyramid. We're actually at the top. And then it goes down to 1,000 world electoral and administrative districts, which is quite interesting, isn't it? How do you divide? So 5 continental divisions, and then 20 regional districts, and 1,000 altogether. There's universities and colleges, the nations of the world. And then you have your House of Peoples, House of Councillors, and House of Nations, and a world parliament. Pretty interesting stuff. I thought that looks to be a very interesting slice of history indeed. So anybody who hasn't burned through their book budget this month, you can go and grab that on eBay. Or you could send a 50 quid donation into Hayes Reviews and I could buy it and read it to you. Nice to have options. But the University of Chicago is basically a Rockefeller-funded operation. So whenever you see it mentioned, or you see something published by the University of Chicago or an academic who studied there, then you got to think in your mind, Rockefeller. So let's continue. Where did I get up to? This bit. The preference extends not only to selected institutions themselves, but even to graduate students in them, For example, the Social Science Research Council in 1952 reported that 856 graduate students working for a degree had received council grants. A total of 47.6%. Oh, are we still live? Yeah, we're still live. I don't know, it looked like it had gone off there for a second. A total of 47.6% went to students at Columbia, Harvard, and the University of Chicago. At Yale, the University of California, and Wisconsin, and students at these 6 received an aggregate of 63.4% of the grants. Students at a total of 16 institutions received 89.1% of the grants, while 93 others received, among them, only 10.9%. And the more than 1,000 remaining institutions received none. If any Catholic institutions were represented in the SSRC list, I missed them. Yes, you don't get funded if you're Catholic, because you're interested in traditions and preserving things. All right, the next section is the Social Science Research Council. Foundations, said the Reese Committee report, becoming more numerous every day, may someday control our whole intellectual and cultural life, and with it, the future of this country. The impact of this intellectual cartel has already been felt deeply in education and in the political scene. The report then discussed the Social Science Research Council, taking it as an example of the, quote, association or individual foundations with one of the intermediary or executive foundations. Another form of interlock. Among the foundations which have supported this distributing agent are these: the Laura Spelman Rockefeller Memorial, the Russell Sage Foundation, the Carnegie Corporation, the Commonwealth Fund, the Julius Rosenwald Fund, the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, the Maurice and Laura Falk Foundation, the General Education Board, which is a Rockefeller outfit, the Grant Foundation, the Scripps Foundation for Research in Population Problems, the American Philosophical Society, the John and Mary R. Markle Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the 20th Century Fund, the East European Fund, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. With support such as this, and even government support, it is no wonder that the Social Science Research Council has become the greatest power in social science research. Its 1929-1930 annual report disclosed some pride in the fact that it has been closely interlocked in an important network. Quote, with our sister councils, the National Research Council, the American Council of Learned Societies, and the American Council on Education, cooperation remains good and becomes increasingly close and significant. There are interlocking members and much personal contact to the respective staff. Despite many such acknowledgements as this, representatives of the foundations and their intermediaries have firmly denied the existence of an interlock. So they admit it, they use the word interlocking, and then they deny it. Oh, there's no interlock. These denials cannot be sincere. There is a mass of evidence to indicate the close working together to which the SSRC report quoted above alluded. Professor Colgrove testified that there was a tendency by the clearinghouses to move to Washington and to cause their constituent societies to move there also. This concentration in one city improves efficiency in a cooperation which goes far beyond the ordinary connotations of that term. Professor Colgrove said, quote, there is more day-to-day conversation and consultation between the offices of the professional societies and the offices of the operating societies, like the American Council of Learned Societies and the offices of the foundations. I think the officers of the professional societies are extremely good listeners and follow pretty carefully the advice that is given them by the foundation officers. Professor Colgrove also said that there had been a conscious concentration of research direction through the clearinghouse organizations. The intermediaries are not merely distributive agencies in the simple sense. They assume a directive function. This is indicated by a statement by Messrs. Donald Young and Paul Webbink in Volume 1, Issue Number 3 of Items, a publication of the Social Science Research Council, in which these gentlemen present the role of the SSRC in improving research. Quote, "The particular role of the Council, however, is that of a central agency to promote the unity of effort in attacking social problems, which is required to assure maximum returns from the work of a multitude of individual social scientists and of independent private and public institutions." They continued that the Council does not attempt to operate as a coordinating agency in any compulsive sense. However, its very availability and the wide support given to it by major foundations have actually given the SSRC a control over research in the social sciences, which is, said the report of the Rees Committee, in its effective use, undoubtedly compulsive. Dr. Pendleton Herring. That's a fantastic name. I love that name. Pendleton Herring. It doesn't sound like a real name, you know. It sounds like a character from a C.S. Lewis book. Dr. Pendleton Herring, president of the Social Science Research Council, proudly quoted in the September 1950 issue of Items this statement of the Ford Foundation. Quote, "The Social Science Research Council has been included in this program because it is the instrumentality most used by individual scholars, universities, and research organizations for interchange of information, planning, and other cooperative functions in the fields described. The Ford grant was not, therefore, to be used for the support of more independent research projects, but to help pay the SSRC overhead to enhance the service it performs for other organizations and scholars." The Rees Committee report described this sociographic pattern of operations in the SSRC. Constituent societies represented at various other nationwide councils. Financial support. By closely cooperating foundations which themselves interlock through directorates. Supported scholarly activity. Concentration on graduates of a few major institutions, which also supply most of the directors of the council, who, since a change of bylaws, are chosen by the council board, not any longer freely elected by constituent associations. Influence of government spending for research. SSRC or similar foundation-supported groups decisively influence National Science Foundation policy and Defense Department spending on research via its officers serving as consultants and board members. The committee was impressed with the peculiar form of management within the Social Science Research Council. As is the case in foundations generally, the management is self-perpetuating. The SSRC, however, purports to represent 7 of the individual social science disciplines through their respective professional societies. Its stationery gives this impression, which is misleading. These societies are not actually members of the SSRC. They are permitted to elect directors to the SSRC board, but only from among panels of candidates nominated by the SSRC itself. This practice cannot help but produce conformity to the ideas of the clique which rules the Social Science Research Council. That theme comes up again and again, isn't it? That no matter the organization, no matter its stated purpose or the publicly admitted, acknowledged narrative around what they exist for, there's some little clique pulling the strings and deciding what happens and what the purpose is, what the mission is, what the goals are. So continuing. It was introduced in substitution for an earlier system of permitting the professional associations to elect representatives of their choosing. They are no longer permitted to select such as they believe competent and wise, but only from among those nominated by the clique. The Rees Committee held this to be a rather undemocratic procedure, to say the least. It pointed out that the totalitarian character of this organization, so important in social science research in the United States, is increased by the fact that its, quote, members are not the societies which it purports to represent, but its former directors. One of these directors explained that the change in the election rules arose from the need to exclude old-fashioned social scientists who would oppose the preference for statistical and empirical projects. It's easy to see in this peculiar organization of the SSRC an operation of the elite concept. If the assumedly constituent professional societies were permitted freely to elect the management of this centralizing organization, those who control it might lose their power, but they are the elite. They want on their board a clear majority or even a unanimity of social scientists who agree with with their theses. Do they not know better than others, better even than the membership of the professional societies of social science professors, what is good for the country? It is not a pleasant concept under American traditions. The Reese Committee report found that the SSRC has in the past gained leadership, among other reasons, because it successfully created the impression of representing the majority of all social scientists in America. In a democratic sense, at least, the SSRC did not represent American scholarship in the social sciences. It thrived, however, by giving the impression that it did. Its power grew as the impression mounted and as it became a constant beneficiary of major foundations. The power of the SSRC, said the Reese Committee report, seems to be used to effect control of the field of social sciences. This is a real peek behind the curtain, ladies and gentlemen. This is really telling you how it's done. Create an organization, market it, fund it, and turn it into an authority. That you can do that if you have enough money and the willpower is there. That's all it takes. Money and marketing, really. Continuing, this statement was not lightly made. There is evidence, said the committee, that professional appointments all over the United States are influenced by SSRC blessing. One example is sufficiently powerful to justify the statement. The 1933 to 1934 report of the National Planning Board was actually prepared by a committee of the Social Science Research Council. It stated, the Council, the SSRC, has been concerned chiefly with the determination of the groups and persons with whom special types of research should be placed. Keeping in mind that this organization, the Social Science Research Council, is supported by a group of major foundations, the hazards involved are significant. If it has the function which was described of deciding what groups and individuals should be used for various research projects, it has a control power which carries with it enormous danger. The committee suggested a special investigation of the extent to which the Social Science Research Council and organizations associated with it control book reviews and the literary production, journals, textbooks, and other publications of social scientists. It's a characteristic of the American world of scholarship that academicians are rated largely on their publications. Tickly throat. I might just have a sip. One sec. Okay. We'll redo that bit. The Social Science Research Council and organizations associated with it control book reviews and the literary production, journals, textbooks, and other publications of social scientists. It's a characteristic of the American world of scholarship that academicians are rated largely on their publications, and the test is often quantitative rather than qualitative. Whether or not a social scientist can procure publication of a paper has a lot to do with his advancement in his career. Similarly, the nature of the reviews given to his paper may be of vital importance. Professor Rowe, testifying regarding the influence of foundations in educational institutions, said, quote, You have to realize that advancement and promotion and survival in the academic field depend upon research and the results and the publication thereof. Here you have, you see, outside organizations influencing the course of the careers of personnel in universities through their control of funds, which can liberate these people from teaching duties, for example, and making it possible for them to publish more than their competitors. If, then, control over an academic journal is concentrated in a few hands, it would be easy enough to impose concepts and philosophies on a generation of scholars and upon school teachers and textbook writers. In more than one instance, this has undoubtedly happened. Such control may take the form of denying space to a nonconformist. It may also influence commercial publishers via the expert readers to whom books are submitted before publication. It is very likely that these experts would be selected from those favoured by the journal. Publishers may be reluctant to publish a nonconformist's book because the conformists, articulate and welcomed in the pages of a professional journal, may pan it with unfavourable reviews or freeze it out of circulation by withholding reviews in the controlled learned journals and in book review sections. The controlling group has the power forcefully to recommend books for purchase in public and school libraries and to advocate the use or rejection of selected textbooks. All this can add up to conformity. There's that word again. Instead of supporting such power, foundations bear the duty to exercise the greatest care, lest their funds be used for such ends of thought control. Yes. They need to be careful that their funds are not used for thought control. That would be terrible. There are other groups powerful in the social sciences besides the Social Science Research Council, the Ford Behavioral Science Fund, the 20th Century Fund, the American Academy of Political and Social Sciences, and others. But, as the Rees Committee pointed out, with almost all of them, there exist personal and organizational ties and cross-connections via supporting foundations. There is, in fact, a similarity of approach among these groups. They all favor the liberal point of view. It is possible that this could be mere coincidence, but it's extremely unlikely. President Grayson Kirk of Columbia University, in an address of May the 31st, 1954, wisely asserted that we, quote, must maintain the greatest possible opportunities for the free clash of opinions on all subjects, trusting to the innate good judgment of men and women to reach decisions that are beneficial to society. Anything in the nature of a concentration of power or an interlocking is pregnant with the possibility of coercive influence. The Rees Committee was shocked to find that one so important in the foundation world as Charles Dollard, then president of the powerful Carnegie Corporation, had contributed an article to the Social Science Research Council's publication Items, in which, referring to mistakes in poll-taking and in the Kinsey research, he made this statement, quote, "The third strategic move which I would suggest is that social science initiate a more rigorous system of internal policing." That social scientists, financed by foundations, may have performed sloppy work is apparent enough, but the Rees Committee found the concept of policing terrifying. Who would do the policing? The Social Science Research Council? Some board of censorship? Efficiency might be increased by a system of policing, but it would be at the cost of freedom, so precious in academic and intellectual fields. Researchers might easily be squeezed into a common mold. Few, said the Rees Committee report, could risk criticizing, few academicians at least. There would emerge what has been called a Gresham's law in the field of professorships in the social sciences. Whatever reasons may have been in the minds of those who created them, the cartel bureaus have, to all practical purposes, assumed the functions of accrediting agencies. The growing tendency toward Gleichschaltung, which is elimination of nonconformism, in our schools and professional societies is exhibited by the current preference for projects. Money is more easily obtainable today for projects chosen by foundation boards than for general purposes with no strings attached. The school administrator, approaching a foundation hat in hand and eager to propose a project which conforms to the known leanings of the foundation executives, is a sad product of our age. No longer does the scholar carry the initiative. He is degraded to a recipient of alms handed out by an almoner who is no longer responsible to the prince. Power is often exerted by foundations to promote projects rather than to support institutions because of the desire of managers to do business in public, to publicize themselves and their services. The Rees Committee report ended its discussion of the Social Science Research Council by admitting that this organization, like others within the concentration of power or interlock in the social sciences, can point to admirable and valuable work which they have done. These organizations have a great deal to their credit, but they have also exercised control and a restrictive influence on scholarship in many ways. Moreover, they have become a power the existence of which, dealing with public trust funds, seemed to the committee to involve at least a potential danger or risk, however benevolently to date its relative despotism may have acted. What a great section there. Something worth learning more about, the Social Science Research Council. But it gives you a real insight into the way control is actually established and maintained, right? It's a club. And the right people scratch, maybe do the right handshakes or scratch the right backs. You make deals and you walk into the revolving door. And you give out the grant money to the organizations that you then go and work for. And so there's a lot of this nepotism. And there's really nothing to stop it happening because of the nature of these organizations, the way they've been constructed legally, and the way the laws that manage them have been written. Remember, this vague, unspecified language used that's open to interpretation, so that when charges are levied against these foundations for spreading propaganda or for engaging in political lobbying, they can wiggle out of it and say, oh, it's just education. Which leads us nicely into the next section of the book here, which is the American Council on Education. The American Council on Education is an intermediary to which the Rees Committee also gave special attention. It is a council of national education associations, financed by membership dues, by government contracts, by heavy contributions from major foundations, and by donations of associated organizations. Among its supporters have been the General Education Board, Rockefeller, the Carnegie Corporation, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Fund for Adult Education, the Alfred P. Sloan Fund, the Payne Fund, B'nai B'rith, the Edward W. Hazen Foundation, the Grant Foundation, the Ellis L. Phillips Foundation. I have used the term clearinghouse. The American Council on Education has called itself that in a pamphlet issued in July 1953. Quote, more specifically, the Council has been a clearinghouse for the exchange of information and opinion. It has conducted many scientific inquiries and investigations into specific educational problems and has sought to enlist appropriate agencies for the solution of such problems. It has stimulated experimental activities by institutions and groups of institutions. It has kept in constant touch with pending legislation affecting educational matters. It has pioneered in methodology that has become standard practice on a national basis. It has acted as liaison agency between the educational institutions of the country and the federal government, and has undertaken many significant projects at the request of the Army, Navy, and State Departments and other governmental agencies, and it has made available to educators and the general public widely used handbooks, informational reports, and many volumes of critical analysis of social and educational problems. The same pamphlet reports on the Council's Research Policy Committee as follows. Established 1952 to study the interrelationships of sponsored research from the viewpoints of federal agencies, industries, and foundations sponsoring such research and the effect on institutions doing the research. This latter angle involves the distribution of grants among institutions and the concentration of research in fields at the expense of other fields, and the distortion of the institutional picture as a whole. The magnitude of the problem is shown by the fact that 20 or more federal agencies are currently subsidizing more than $150 million worth of research a year. Industrial and business concerns and private foundations also sponsor research. The numerous special interests involved may approach the same problems in different ways and come up with different solutions. It is the aim of this council committee, composed of college presidents, vice presidents for research, business officers, and faculty members directly engaged in sponsored research projects, to attempt to formulate a policy for the national level based on cooperative relationships. Thus, this council, like the Social Science Research Council, is an interrelating or coordinating agency which establishes policy and acts as a distributing agent for foundations whose business is grant making. Along planned and integrated lines. Again, we have the emphasis on efficiency, as though this were the most desirable objective in research. The Reese Committee report commented, quote, "As Professor Rowe and others have said, it would seem far better to lose efficiency and give individuals of quality the opportunity to go in their own respective directions unhampered by any group control, direction, or pressure. However laudable much or most of its work may have been, the Council has certainly been one of the media through which foundation funds have been used to effect considerable control or influence over education in the United States. Some may argue that this control or influence has been wholly good. Were this so, we would still believe that the power of great foundations to affect educational policies and practices is one which should concern the public. By the same token, we believe that clearinghouse organizations, while they may serve a purpose in the direction of efficiency, are of questionable desirability when interlocked financially or by personnel with these foundations. The aggregate power involved in such a concentration gives us concern." And the next section here is other aspects of interlock. The clearinghouse organizations themselves are interconnected, forming veritable associations of associations and councils of associations and councils. Bureaucracy, in other words. 3 times removed from their constituent individuals and institutions, these express the desire so prevalent among foundation executives to avoid duplication and to bring in what they conceive to be order. Order out of chaos. And efficiency, this cropping up time and time again of the word efficiency reminds me of just technocracy in general as a movement. It's so that everything is managed and it is efficient, and we know where all the resources are going and all the energy is being used, and everybody's consumption is tracked and everybody's expenditure is tracked. And it's that the order and the efficiency and the control, it all kind of links in and ties together and complements each other. But continuing, there is, for example, a conference board of associated research councils, through which the Social Science Research Council, the American Council on Education, the National Research Council, and the American Council of Learned Societies get together to facilitate action on matters of common concern, continuing earlier informal consultations of the executives of the councils. What does that mean, to facilitate action? This just reminds me of the kind of corporate speak that you hear in large organizations all the time. It's words that you understand the word facilitate and you understand the word action. But what does it mean in this context? What is an action? And what you find out is that a lot of these bureaucracies are bloated and convoluted. A lot of the chain of command is wishy-washy and vague. And I think in large part, all that exists just to facilitate the moving around of money and to excuse the charging of large fees and the extortionate rates that people may charge for their expertise. It's all drummed up. It's all down to branding and marketing more than actually doing anything as such. And people make a whole, like I said, a whole career, a whole lifetime out of being a bureaucrat, sitting on boards and councils and being in meetings and taking minutes and listening to pitches and proposals and filling out paperwork and writing reports and really just doing a lot, but it's not business, it's busyness with a Y. Busyness. I'll put it in the chat. Because I think that's what a lot of people are actually engaged in. And they might tell themselves that they've got this high-flying career, but actually they're just engaged in busyness, not business. They're not doing anything, not producing anything of value, not actually helping people solve problems or get results. It's just paperwork, box ticking, form filling, attending meetings, ringing people up, and a lot of being around the bush and not a lot of actually getting things done. That's what this description here just reminds me of. Associations of associations and councils of associations and councils. It's just, it's Kafkaesque to the point of comedy. You know, you got to laugh at it sometimes. Which reminds me, I got tipped off by someone in the Telegram chat, Hayes Review Telegram chat, to this book, which I'd never heard of before. And I got it for £2, I think. So, bargain. And it's called Brussels Laid Bare: How the EU Treated Its Chief Accountant When She Refused to Go Along with Its Fraud and Waste. And this is by Marta Andreasen, MEP. It's a real tiny little paperback book. It's about 120 pages long or something. Yeah, 130 pages there. But read this little blurb on the back. This book could be the most important document ever produced about the European Union. So remember, talking about bureaucrats and bureaucracies and busyness and bloated meetings of councils, of leadership boards and all that nonsense. For while others have attempted to reveal what's going on in the rotten heart of Brussels, there has been no one at the level of Marta Andreasen, who was the chief accountant responsible for the whole of the EU budget. As recompense for her efforts to make the EU's finances transparent and accountable, the corrupt Brussels apparat set out first to silence, then to humiliate, and finally to destroy her. Possibly no other case shows more clearly how the EU, through stealth, deceit, and bullying, has become a modern tyranny. And the reason I remembered this, and I was reminded of this, is because of this review down here from Christopher Booker, who says, her book reads like a chilling cross between two Kafka novels, The Trial and the Castle. Shocking. And I know Christopher Booker. I know his name, at least. I don't know him personally, although I do know he's dead now. But he wrote this book, The Great Deception, The Secret History of the European Union. And he wrote another one. Whoa. I just destroyed my stage lighting. But he also wrote this one as well. The 7 Basic Plots, Why We Tell Stories. Christopher Booker. Nice. I got that with a Waterstones voucher that I got for Christmas. Tiny text. But I thought it'd be pretty interesting because I've been getting really bored of films and TV shows these days. And it'd be good to know. A lot of it is repetition. A lot of it doesn't work these days. It's kind of none of the character arcs that you would expect or want to see that would be satisfying ever happen now. So I thought that'd be a good book to dive into and learn about, the 7 Basic Plots. But this is Christopher Booker. He wrote that. He told us about the secret history of the European Union, and he reviewed Brussels Laid Bare. And he said that her story is Kafkaesque. And that's what I think is, that is the way to think about the modern world in a large, that tells us a lot of truth about our governments, about our corporations, about the service economy, about the technotronic era that we're living in, the post-industrial era that we're living in. It's all keyboards and meetings and Zoom calls and video calls and Excel spreadsheets and just pushing pixels around. And nobody's really doing anything. A lot of just busyness. And that's not a new thing. Goes back to the 50s and before that. And that's what this is reminding me of, this whole section here. So yes, to facilitate action and continue early informal consultations. It's just words. Continuing, he says, to whatever types of action this conference of councils may be limited by its documents of organization, its meetings nevertheless afford an opportunity for coordinated planning through conferences of the respective executives. A council to finance higher education has been created jointly by the Carnegie, Rockefeller, Ford, and Sloan Foundations, each of which contributes $60,000 to it annually for a period of 3 years. This money does not go to the direct support of higher education. It pays for a staff. It pays for a bunch of bureaucrats. What a surprise. It pays for a staff under Mr. Wilson Compton, which spends its time advising industrial corporations and other donors how to give money and assisting institutions in their fundraising campaigns. This is where all the money's going, really. It's to keep the bureaucrats alive. These foundations have thus in combination created another power position of influence in education. Periodical meetings of foundation executives now take place in New York, informal in nature, perhaps for the purpose of discussing policy problems and determining common action. De Tocqueville, in one of his famous observations about democracy in America, reported with some amazement the propensity of this nation for the formation of voluntary associations for common ends. But he saw the working of democratic forces in this expression of freedom of assembly. The competing power of groups produced an effective method of checks and balances, preventing a domination of the people by autocratic forces. The more recent urge for nationwide hierarchic so-called clearinghouses fostered by foundations was not foreseen by de Tocqueville. These are in reality instruments for ideological and political Gleichschaltung. This word has come up twice. I've got to add it to my vocabulary and get used to using it, and I've got to learn how to pronounce it. Gleichschaltung. Gleichschaltung. It means getting rid. It means standardizing. It means making things uniform. So these councils and associations are instruments for ideological and political standardization. Is the difference essential or only a matter of degree? between an organization of scientists or authors subject to the monetary control of power cliques and the so-called associations and academies operating in totalitarian countries. With good luck, an American scientist may find an independent publisher and emancipate himself from the clique's financial control. But such cases are rare and confined to men of great courage and of contempt for economic rewards. Few and far between indeed. The United States government now spends far more money on social science research than do all the foundations combined. This is why it's so important to understand the social sciences and the history. Who created it? How did it become accepted and mainstream? Because it wasn't always. This might constitute a counterforce to the influence of the foundation complex, were it not for the fact that to a great extent the same persons who control or expend the funds of the complex in the social science fields also direct or advise on the expenditures of the federal government in these areas. It is not surprising, therefore, that government agencies operating in social science areas have exhibited the same preferences and idiosyncrasies as has the foundation complex. It is a case of Tweedledee and Tweedledum, or to put it another way, a condition of constant exchange of men and ideas between the complex and government. Yeah, it's that revolving door at the top of the pyramid. People think it's some like all-seeing eye or some kind of demonic archon. It's actually a revolving door. And you can just, if you get bored of your cushy government position, you can just walk through the revolving door and pop out the other side into a cushy corporate position. And if you get bored of that, you can walk through the revolving door and pop out the other side into a cushy little charitable philanthropic foundation role. And then you can pop out the other side onto a board of, associates who form a council and get together to assist and advise in the overseeing of certain administrative duties and practices of the board members and trustees of the foundation charitable groups. You see what I mean? It's just all this very vague corporate language that is hard to pin down and understand, but what it boils down to is a bloated bureaucracy of people who don't really want to do any hard work, but they want to make a lot of money and have a nice, comfortable life. So we're at the final section for this chapter now. It's called The Influence of Foundation Managers in the Interlock. So reminding people that a theme that's come out very strongly in the book so far is that even though there's a lot of money going around, there's a lot of power, there's a lot of influence, it's called foundations, that power and influence, this is really guided and directed and owned by a small clique in every situation. And there was even the example of somebody, a director who was brought on, I think, into one of the foundations or to one of the clearinghouse organizations. And he realized very quickly that he really had no say or sway in that organization. He'd just been brought in to be a sort of dummy figurehead, to sit there and nod and smile, but not to actually do anything. That account was in the last reading. And a quote from him as well. So that's how it works. You got circles within circles within circles. And this methodology goes back to secret societies, goes back to, Cecil Rhodes, the Round Table movement, the Milner Group, Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope, explaining, or I suppose more so the Anglo-American establishment, where he's saying it's kind of hard to tell who's in the inner clique and the inner circle, but there's an inner circle and an outer circle and then an outer circle, and only the most loyal and capable and ruthless and cunning are going to get invited and brought into the inner circles. But in each stage and each step, you're going to think you've made it. Kind of reminiscent of C.S. Lewis's book, That Hideous Strength. You had the main character, Mark, who spends his whole life trying to get in to the inner circle, and that's all he cares about. And he abandons girlfriends and he abandons best friends because he's always trying to impress the people who he thinks are the in group. And he's trying to get inside and get in with these people his whole life, and just totally neglecting his own passions and interests and personality and individuality, and trying to push all that down and ignore it and act in the way that he thinks is going to get him accepted into these little cliques and groups and circles within circles, right? Of course, when he eventually makes it to the very inner ring of the inner circle, he finds out that it's run by like demons who communicate through a disembodied head that's fed with tubes. So that's what's waiting for you on the inside of the cliques. But this final section is the influence of foundation managers in the interlock. So it's about 2.5 pages, and then we'll be done with chapter 3. Almost all the executives within the foundation complex whom I have met have been exceptionally pleasant and highly intelligent men. My criticism of them is confined to their almost universally common characteristic of permitting their social, intellectual, and principally their political predilections to affect their work as administrators of public trusts. When it has been called to their attention that an amazing amount of conformity and uniformity exists in the operations of the major foundation complex, apologists for these organizations have sometimes suggested that this is not because of the preferences of the foundation managers. They say that this phenomenon stems from a prevailing bias in favor of what is called liberalism. These apologists tell us that the foundation executives follow the fashions of the times. In this manner, they play safe. That may be so. It is difficult, in a situation such as this, to establish a cause and effect relationship with accuracy, to determine the extent to which foundation managers have followed or created trends. We do know, however, that the existing conformism within the social sciences has been nurtured abundantly by foundation support. Foundation executives often pay lip service to nonconformism and pride themselves on their contribution to new and unorthodox ideas, change and progress, right? But the cooperation among the managers within the foundation complex does not favor the nonconformist. On the contrary, it has produced an excess of mediocre, routine work. Nor is much of what these managers point to as new and unorthodox really so. Most of it may have been new or unorthodox 20 or 30 years ago. These amazingly like-minded men have contributed substantially to converting into current orthodoxy what were revolutionary ideas during the 20s. They have supported for so long what they euphemistically call the New Deal, but what is really a modified form of socialism. That they are no longer capable of recognizing that other concepts of value may be held bona fide by thinkers and scholars. It's good that he acknowledged the New Deal as being a modified form of socialism there. What these professionals choose to call themselves is of no consequence. One maintained to me that he was a conservative, yet he is one of the most radical-minded of the foundation managers. A stereotyped bureaucracy has developed among the major foundations and their satellite organizations. It has common ideas, both as to concepts of responsibility and business affairs. The ideas and concepts of this bureaucracy are based heavily on the assumption of a cultural lag, the need to adjust law, values, and human affairs in general to a tempo dictated by our rapid technological progress. The adoption of this interpretation of society, somewhat related to Marx's economic determinism, impels its believers to strive for permanent and continual revolution, a position not too easy to differentiate from the materialistic concept of history. They have become almost a guild. The bureaucrats of the foundation complex. They have become almost a guild. Yeah, and somebody mentioned earlier in the chat, a bit like a cult. Who was it? It was probably It was a bit more recent than this, wasn't it? Was it you, Doris? Was it David James Flood? Or maybe I'm just imagining things. I'm sure somebody said they sound like a cult. But I can't find it now. Maybe somebody deleted it. But yeah, a guild, a cult, a class of people, a group. They got their own interest. They've got their own purpose. They want their nice cushy life sitting on their boards and their meetings and not really doing anything. Busyness instead of business. But we got a quote here. As the Reese Committee report said, and this is about the bureaucrats at the foundations becoming a kind of guild, the professionals who exert so important an influence upon thought and public opinion in the United States form a sort of professional class, an elite of management of the vast public funds available to their will. The managerial class. They can scarcely avoid getting an exaggerated idea of their own importance and becoming preoccupied with holding and enlarging their roles. Yeah, that's another part of it as well. Once you're in this kind of cushy system, then you want to stay in there. So you need to, it becomes self-perpetuating. That was one of the things that he said, I think, in part 1. Talked about this group of people becoming self-perpetuating. Clearly enough, foundation executives are entitled to their political opinions as private individuals. If they were not acting in concert, one could even excuse the impact of such political opinions on their work as individuals within foundations. What is wrong is permitting any Gleichschaltung, or even the appearance of it. Anything in the nature of a cartel-like coordination in education and in such vital fields as foreign relations and the social science studies tends to reduce competition and, through a form of collusion, to endanger the freedom of our intellectual and public life. The emergence of this special class in our society, endowed with immense powers of thought control, is a factor which must be taken into account in judging the merits of contemporary foundation operations. The concentration of power, or interlock, which has developed in foundation-supported social science research and social science education, is largely the result of a capture of the integrated organizations by like-minded men. The plain, simple fact is that the so-called liberal movement in the United States has captured most of the major foundations and has done so chiefly through the professional administrator class, which has not hesitated to use these great public trust funds to political ends and with bias. That is a mic drop quote. But I'm not going to drop my mic. I already dropped my backlight today. So, yeah. It's a special class of people. They have an obvious bias. I think Rene Wormser, he writes as though he doesn't want to come out and make any accusations. He doesn't want to talk about intent. He doesn't want to go, I think, down the conspiratorial angle or route. But all the evidence is there. It's walking and quacking and looking very much like a duck. So, but I suppose he's got to maintain this objectivity as best as he can and write in a way that isn't leading people. But I think, he lays it pretty clearly in that last paragraph there. Lays it out pretty clearly. I think I'm going to sneeze. Good evening, Doris and Darren. Good to have you both here. Yeah, so that's the end of the concentration of power, and that's chapter 3. And the next chapter we've got coming up is all about scientism. Science and scientism. Sorry, social science and scientism. And the next chapter is about 50 pages. And it's got an account of Dr. Kinsey's funding by way of the Rockefeller Foundation, the exclusion of the dissident, some more about the Gleichschaltung, the standardization, consolidation, the uniformity being rolled out and supported by these organizations and these funds. And it sounds like it's going to be a very good chapter indeed. 50 pages is kind of more than we can get through on one stream, and we've got quite a bit of time left, so maybe we'll tick off a few sections of this now. But yeah, what about that last section then, the concentration of power? Very good, very well written, I think. Excuse me, I'm just going to blow my nose. Each section of this book builds really nicely on the previous. And I like that they're bringing in quotes, not only from the people they interviewed as part of the committee, but also quotes from the literature produced by some of the groups and organizations that they're discussing. There was the leaflet quoted in that section, which admitted to the interlock, right? The interlocking members, and then which the groups tended to then deny later on, right? But it shows you how things like consensus are created. You've got the money coming in by way of the philanthropic organization, and they'll pile all that money into some sort of council, and they'll establish that council as a kind of authority, and then they'll use the authority that they've established and given to that council to back up and help establish the consensus in the public. And this is what a lot of people don't realize, I think, is that authority is often not there where it appears to be there. If that makes sense. You can project authority and you can drum it up through marketing and branding and media manipulation. But actually that person or that group or that organization might not have any whatsoever. It's kind of like a computer software guy getting into public health and investing in, injections and spreading them all over the world. It's like the guy has no background in that methodology, no background in health, no background in public health, but suddenly makes this pivot from computer software to vaccinations. And then we're still, watching his documentaries and his TED Talks and his interviews on television, and he's passed off as some sort of authority. And this guy says something, we got to go listen to it, because look, he's got all this money and he's on television and they've made a documentary and he's got a TED Talk and he's on Netflix. So I think that's a really important aspect of this, is we're seeing that, I use the example of the University of Chicago as well. It was the Rockefellers poured massive amounts of money into it. They kept it going when it was bankrupt and running at a deficit for many, many years. And then, you put a lot of academicians through it. And then you point to those academicians and you use them to build out. You use them as points of authority in your, whatever it is that you're trying to get done, whatever you're trying to achieve. So having the money and having the media machine to do the advertising and the marketing on behalf of your chosen authority figures is very powerful. And, we, the public, fall for it over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And, to temper that, you might want to look at a book such as The Most Dangerous Superstition by Larkin Rose, just to get a little counterbalance to this idea of authority. It's a good blurb. Most people looking at our troubled world with its long history of injustice and human suffering will attribute social evils to the greed, ignorance, hatred, or lack of compassion of others. Rarely does anyone consider the possibility that his own attitudes, perceptions, and beliefs may be the root cause of most of the world's suffering. But in almost every case, they are. The vast majority of theft, extortion, intimidation, harassment, assault, and even murder, the vast majority of man's inhumanity to man, comes not from the greed, hatred, and intolerance that lurks in our hearts, but from one pernicious and almost universal assumption, one unquestioned belief, one irrational, self-contradictory superstition that infects all races, all religions, all nationalities, ages, and income levels. If humankind could give up this one false idea, even without otherwise acquiring another scrap of wisdom or compassion, the vast majority of injustice and oppression would instantly cease. But this cannot happen until people are ready and willing to turn their judgmental eyes upon themselves, to objectively examine their own belief systems, to recognize and understand, and finally to abandon the most dangerous superstition. That's a really good one. I like this. I haven't read this copy. I borrowed a copy from a friend, and again, it's 200 pages long, but it's really well written. And the most dangerous superstition is simply the belief that other people have authority to do things that you don't have the authority to do. So they have the authority to take 20% of your income, for example, or they have the authority to kidnap you and put you in a cage if you say the wrong thing on Twitter, or they have the authority to print money. There's all sorts of things, that rights that are given to some, but not all. And it's some are more equal than others. It's exactly that. George Orwell talks about it in Animal Farm. Some animals are more equal than others, which is just illogical and self-refuting on the face of it. Either all humans have the same rights, or we don't. Or none of us have the right. It's not that some humans have some rights and some humans have a different set of rights. And so when you start to try and iron out some of these contradictions, some of these illogical rules and ways of thinking, it can work wonders for your peace of mind, but it can also wreck your long-held and cherished beliefs in a variety of institutions and aspects of our world. But that's a really good one. And I think it complements Worms's chapter 3 very nicely, because it sort of destroys what is built up in chapter 3 by these interlocks, by these this group who pass through that revolving door, and they award themselves money. They're on the group that has the money, and they're involved in the group that receives the money, and they're involved in making the decision to award the money to the group that they're involved in, who are going to receive the money. You can't get more overt and obvious conflicts of interest than that. Then you've got the nepotism, right? You've got the buddies and the friends and the colleagues who know each other and work together and get each other these cushy gigs. And remember at the beginning, he told us that sometimes these people have up to 13 or 14 trustee roles, and there's no physical way that they could be doing all of that properly and competently and diligently and correctly. So building up authority, it's part of the illusion. It's part of the, think of it as like Wizard of Oz. Rene is really pulling back the curtain in this book. So you might be impressed by all this money that gets slushed around under the banner of philanthropy and charitable giving and supporting the social sciences and education. But actually, it's not what it seems. People, they get away with it because they rely on us assuming that the marketing is accurate, that the message we receive, the story that's on their website is accurate. And we don't really know what goes on behind the scenes, what deals are being made, what plans, what schemes, what decisions about who gets funded and who doesn't get funded. But the effect of that is you pander to the people with their hands on the purse strings. And that was explained very well in this last section. Teachers and researchers, they've got to go along with the preferences and the bias and the tastes of the people who have the money and who dictate where that money goes. And that's, of course, just the ones who aren't sitting on both sides of that giving and receiving transaction. The Social Science Research Council, that's an avenue for further learning and research and reading, I think. That would probably make a good preamble ramble if I was to bring the preamble rambles back. That would be a good one. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap it up a little earlier than usual because my throat is suffering and I'm struggling to get through long paragraphs without spluttering and and needing to stop to blow my nose and have a swig and cough and all that good stuff. Plus, we just got to the end of a chapter, so it's always nice to end at the end of a chapter. And we got the next chapter coming up, which is going to be a lot more about social science, a lot more about scientism. And we had a little look ahead. And I think if he carries on the way he has been in the first 3 chapters, then we can rest assured that the rest of the book is going to be very good. So that's the first 3 chapters done of Foundations, Their Power and Influence. So I hope you enjoyed that. And reminder that I'm not going to be live streaming for the rest of the month. 6th of March is going to be the next live stream where we'll be continuing with Foundations, Their Power and Influence. So if you need something to do in the meantime, do not forget to check out the playlists tab on YouTube. It's got all the books that we've read through. Rumble has some of them, Odyssey has some of them, but YouTube has all of them. So I think a good complementary book to go along with this one would be either The Rockefeller Foundation, Story of the Rockefeller Foundation by Raymond Fosdick, or Fabian Freeway by Rose Martin. But, well, I'd say Fabian Freeway is the best out of those 2 books. But the Story of the Rockefeller Foundation is pretty good because it's straight from the horse's mouth what they were into, where the money was going. But it's not too salacious and revelatory because it's written by the guy who ran the foundation. So it's just their PR approved version of events. Nothing juicy in there, unfortunately. But it would be a nice companion to this book. So I'm going to have a few weeks off. I'm going to do some traveling. I'm going to take my son around to visit family that he hasn't met yet. It's going to be good. He's got some cousins his age to go and play with and meet. That's going to be very exciting indeed. And I'm just going to be laying low in terms of online activity, taking a bit of a break from obsessively checking email inboxes and message threads and all that stuff and the numbers changing. Yeah, I was saying to Melissa last night that it's it's like, because of all the AI stuff now that's getting rolled out, it's made being online much less enjoyable for me. And I'm just tired of being inundated with links and videos and documentaries and threads and chats and revelations and headlines and clickbait. And the fact that most of the internet is just a big funnel. And most of what you see out there is funneling you towards buying something. You know, and even me and what I do in my channel, and this, what you're watching right now, is part of a funnel, in that I would like people to sign up to the online community, then I can make a bit of money, and I get to meet people and hang out with you on video calls and build relationships and build community and do some more reading and learning and talking about books, you know, in a more immediate face-to-face setting, rather than just me talking on my own for 3 hours and reading the comments that trickle in, right? So even this is part of a funnel. But that's how you've got to see a lot of things out there. The free content and the clickbait stuff and the outrage and the salacious stories. I don't know why I keep saying the word salacious twice in it, but I suppose the Epstein stuff that's going on at the moment, it's just hijacking people's attention. And everyone's riding that wave because they know that that's what's getting the clicks and the eyeballs at the moment. And so it's about harnessing and gathering and farming as much of that precious life force and attention as you can, in the hopes that you can some of it will trickle down your funnel and end up with the transfer of money into your bank account. You know, that's what a lot of the internet is. And I do want to get paid and build a business doing what I love, but at the same time, the work is important, and it matters more that I get the word out about these books and I read them myself, and I become capable and competent in explaining them and talking about them and discussing them. That's more important than the money thing. The money thing would just be a nice added bonus if it happened. So yeah, the internet is just a gigantic funnel, and most of it is a waste of time. Most of it is not going to help you in your life, your goals, your efforts to make sense of things. And now a lot of it is just made by software, and it's gross. There was a horrible cartoon. I'm going to show you this because I had to look at it. And if I had to look at it, you've got to look at it too. And this came up on LinkedIn, and I hate LinkedIn. I really do. LinkedIn's horrible. But I go on there when I'm at work sometimes to check in with people who've moved on, or to have a look at other opportunities, or whatever. It's LinkedIn. You know what it's all about. And somebody had posted this cartoon. They'd made a LinkedIn post, and they'd posted this cartoon. And they were talking about how effective teaching needs to happen by breaking the task down into these many, many manageable steps, and each step needs to be doable and achievable, but they need to be logical, and they need to build, and that's how you get the students up to mastery. Most teachers, he's saying, are either making it too easy, signified by these people having a kip on the floor, or too hard, signified by these children down here drowning, and the handle for them to not drown is way too high. And I looked at this for a few seconds, and I'm like, this is not sitting well with me, and then you keep looking at it a bit more. And in fact, I might have to just disappear myself from the bottom corner here. You keep looking at it for a while, and the more you look at it, the more stuff you notice is wrong with it, right? So for example, if you go down to this sleeping people in the middle here, I'm guessing this one here's the teacher, because it's this figure's longer. But if you look at the bottom, there's like a person popping out of the bottom of the sheet and then the legs coming out here. And I'm trying to work out what is the sleeping arrangement of these people in the middle here. I'm thinking that's such a weird way to draw people having a nap in a classroom. That's so bizarre. It doesn't make sense. So then I moved down here and I'm looking at these drowning children. I'm thinking, this guy at the front has got 3 arms. Why is he drowning? If you got 3 arms, you should be able to stay afloat. This guy's got 1 arm and he's got 1 arm. So yeah, I get it. Maybe that's got something to do with them drowning. 3-armed guy at the front, he should be he should be capable of keeping himself afloat. This guy over here's also got 3 arms. And at this point, I'm like, okay, I see what's going on here. It's an AI generated cartoon that somebody's created, or somebody hasn't created it. Somebody's told a piece of software to make this so that they can post it with their LinkedIn blog that's, supposed to, I don't know, do whatever LinkedIn blogs are supposed to do. And the blog, the point he was making was good. Break the task and the journey down into manageable steps that are doable and achievable and logically ordered, and walk people through that, right? But all I could think about was this 3-armed child who shouldn't be drowning and this weird sleeping arrangement in the middle there, and the bad numbering. It goes 2, 3, 4, 9, 9, 8, 6, 5, 6, 5, 7. I'm like, and this is where we're at now, where I can't even concentrate on learning something useful from LinkedIn because I'm just distracted by the crap AI art that has to be delivered along with it, and so that just makes things more annoying, more frustrating. It makes the whole online experience less pleasurable, and it annoys me, and I just had to whinge and moan about that. To explain why I'm looking forward to having a break. Because these days, there's, the enjoyment I get out of being online and interacting is, there's a very few places where I like to spend my time. A few groups, a few chats, and obviously the people inside the book club who I was meeting. I've paused the meetings for the rest of the month, but we were meeting twice a week and always having good, interesting conversations. It's really good to meet up with people who are interested in the same topics and have the same sort of worldview. And it doesn't mean you have to agree on everything. It's not about establishing consensus and Gestaltung, uniformity of thinking, right? It's just about hanging out with other people who are curious, respectful, kind, and exchanging ideas and books and research, and being able to do that without seeing the other person's mind reject you automatically because they've been programmed never to think about these kinds of things. So that's the value of community. That's the value of meeting up with other like-minded people. That's the space I'm trying to create. Because the internet is going to continue to be awash with distracting AI nonsense garbage. More videos, more audio, more things that look interesting and revelatory and important, but are actually just will turn out to be fake later on. That's going to happen more and more and more, I think. And yes, it's going to be used by the bad guys, the bad people, the enemy, the parasites. But the only solution really is to disengage and re-engage with real human beings who have something to say and who aren't just parroting talking points and opinions that they've downloaded. Real human beings who read books and do research and think and apply logic. And even if you're not academic, even if you're not exceptionally articulate, I hope people realize that I'm not articulate or academic at all. I just recognize books are important, and I have a passion for collecting them, and I enjoy reading them. It's just the thing that I'm into. And if you get to connect with other people who are into the same things you're into, and they see the value in the same sort of things that you do, that's a real relief. It can do absolute wonders for your mental health And it helps you deal with the people who aren't like that, the normies, the special normies and sheeples in your life, because we all have them and we all have to interact with them and deal with them. We can't just shut them out and ignore them. Or we can, but it's not very nice to do that. So better to have an outlet for the curious research and the learning that you want to do. And then you don't have to force all that learning and all those topics onto people who aren't interested, who don't care, because they got their stuff that they do care about, right? So that's what I think is good about having an online community and a space to go with other like-minded people. So that's a little pitch, I suppose, for the online community. But I'm going to wrap it up. My throat's getting sore. And I said that 15 minutes ago, and here I am still rambling. So it's allmylinks.com/hazereviews if you want to support at all, or send me an email, or find where to find me, Telegram and Twitter and other places, other platforms. You can send me an email, nick@hazereviews.com. Always happy to hear from people, and just whatever you want to say, get in touch, let me know. That's a good thing for me. And continuityofcontrol.com, if you haven't been through that already, it's kind of like a mini course, educational primer, packed full of quotes to introduce you to some of the parasitical elites' ways of thinking, so that you can see them, so you can handle them, so you can point them out to other people and dodge them in your own lives as they try to, turn things into a real mess. So cheers, everybody. I'm clearing my throat. It's getting worse. I'm going to wrap it up. I'll play you out with some guitar music, as always. And I appreciate sincerely, hand on heart, having you here, watching on the replay, tuning in, liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing the videos, whatever it is that you do that is at all related to this channel and to my efforts is amazing to me. That anybody's interested, it's a bloody miracle. It's fantastic. So enjoy the rest of February. Longer days are coming, warmer evenings are coming, right? Hang in there if you're in a kind of crappy weather zone. Keep going one day at a time. We'll get better. We're heading into the spring, and then we got summer, and then we do it all over again. So just hang in there. Stay sane. Keep diligently looking after your physical and mental health as best you can. Make space and time in your life to unwind, to relax, to play, to do unstructured, fun activities that aren't serious and mentally taxing. And spend time with the people who matter to you most, and tell them you love them, and just treasure those moments, because who knows when they're going to run out, right? None of us know that. So that is it. That's all I got to say. Take care, everybody. Take care of yourselves and each other. I'll see you in about, is it 4? 1, 2, 3. It's 4 weeks. Goodness me. Don't forget there's short clips. They're all less than 3 minutes being posted every day. So if you see those and you like them and you can share them around, that would be very good. While I'm not live streaming, I'm still putting out some content. It's all from the previous live streams, but some of those clips are good little slices of learning in their own right. So have a good one. I will see you in 4 weeks' time. Maybe I will look slightly different. I don't know. I certainly won't have a tan. I will have got my glasses back by then. Hopefully. I don't think I will have any more hair than I do now. So, I'm sure it'll fly by. And then we'll be continuing with Foundations. This is one of my favorite books we've read on the channel. I think it's one of the most important books we've read on the channel as well. So, can't wait to carry it on with you all. So take care, and till next time, God bless. you.